Hey everybody, my name is Philip Jordan, host of the Talking SEC podcast. And if you want some more SEC content, please go down in the description below, find the links, and you can check out the full edition of this episode. And joining me right now on the phone is Chris Gordy, host of the Locked On SEC podcast. Yeah, you talk about new coaches. LSU, of course, Ed Orgeron's still there. They don't have a new head coach, but they are bringing in a new staff, completely reworked staff, way up second out here in the offseason with the LSU Tigers after obviously the disappointing season. They ended 5-5, and then they are bringing in their new defensive coordinator, Daronte Jones, who's coming from the Minnesota Vikings as DB coach. Just for you, where are you at with this hire? Do you like the hire for LSU? Do you think it's a really good hire for them as their new defensive coordinator?
It's an interesting hire because we know publicly, at least, LSU went really hard after Marcus Freeman, who was the Cincinnati defensive coordinator, and just asked the Georgia Bulldogs how good of a coordinator he was in the bowl game. Really did a good job against the Georgia offense. But he ends up choosing to take the Notre Dame job, and look, it makes sense. His family is all there in the Midwest. That's a lot closer to where he is instead of moving his family down to Louisiana. And then, you look at the second candidate that tried to get, Ryan Nielsen from the Saints, the defensive line coach there, and he had a connection to Coach O, and ultimately Sean Payton blocked the move and had some verbiage in his contract that didn't allow him to go to the college ranks. So LSU was basically on their third option, and Daronte Jones, a lot of people just, I got to be honest, most people never even knew who that was prior to this week. So it's a little bit of a surprising name, but when you start to read into it and see that he was the DB's coach at Wisconsin years ago under Dave Aranda. So, it's interesting, the two dynamics of the two coordinators that Ed Orgeron has hired. His offensive coordinator came from a disciple of Joe Brady, who was the guy who he struck gold with for the national championship year. And then now his new defensive coordinator is a disciple of Dave Aranda, who was obviously his DC the year they won the championship as well. So, good pedigree, but we're going to see how good Daronte Jones is at the college level, because he has not coached very much in the college ranks. But I'll be honest with you, as bad as LSU's defense was last year under Bo Pelini, even if Daronte Jones even has a mediocre defense, it's going to be an improvement over what we saw last year at LSU. That was one of the worst defenses I've ever seen, and I really don't understand how Bo Pelini put such a bad defense out there week in and week out for what he was getting paid millions and millions of dollars. And just the last thought on Daronte Jones, what I like about him is LSU was criticized last year that Coach O kind of had a staff of a bunch of old guys, a bunch of old white guys, is really what a lot of people were saying, just guys who he'd been friends with for years and knew were good coaches and all that. But the college game has changed so much. Like, you got to be younger. You got to be more inventive. And not to mention, there's a big push right now across all sports to have more minority coaches. And when you talk about a football team that's filled with, African-American football players, the majority of it, it makes sense that you would have more African-American assistant coaches. And so, I believe this is the first time in forever, if not a really long time, that LSU has a coordinator of color, meaning, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. So I like it from that aspect as well, with the social injustice protests and stuff last summer. That there was talk that there was some disconnect between Coach O and the coaching staff and the players. This at least brings in a guy that is much younger, and like I said, a black head coach who maybe a lot more of the black players can relate to him now, as opposed to had they went out and brought in, I don't know, a 65-year-old white defensive coordinator that no offense to, but just probably can't relate to the younger guys these days. So that's what I like about what LSU's done, is they've gotten a lot younger with their offensive and defensive coordinator hires.
And I look at their hires, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator with LSU, and you brought it up too as well. Of course, on offense, Jake Peetz, he coached under Joe Brady there with the Panthers. He was quarterbacks coach, and you have DJ Mangus coming in. He was with the Panthers. He'll be their new, passing game coordinator. And of course, when you look there at Daronte Jones, coached under Dave Aranda at Wisconsin. And I don't mean this tongue-in-cheek like I'm picking. I'm not. But how much of it does it feel like, okay, we're trying to dip back into that 2019 well a little bit and kind of regain and kind of some of that momentum we had that season? Of course, you're not going to get to that level. No one should ever expect, to repeat what you did in 2019, but still trying to find some of that momentum you had from that season and kind of bring it back in 2021.
Yeah, and I could see where people would feel that way, and they're not wrong. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. He struck lightning in a bottle, but the Joe Brady thing was really that was a surprise. Like nobody thought he was going to bring these NFL concepts and really combined with Joe Burrow. If LSU doesn't have Joe Burrow that year, with Joe Brady, with Steve Ensminger's play calling, I mean, it doesn't work the way that it did. But that said, Joe Brady skyrocketed from there. He's now an offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers and interviewed for a ton of head coaching jobs in the NFL this offseason. That just shows you how quickly that guy skyrocketed to success. Clearly he knows something. And Jake Peetz and DJ Mangus, who are the offensive coordinator and passing game coordinator now for LSU, know Joe Brady and his system very well. So I almost envision as Joe Brady hands them his playbook and say, here you go. Here's what I brought. You guys could bring the same thing back to LSU, because LSU's offense really wasn't bad this year. I mean, it was Miles Brennan going down is what killed them. But if you go look at those games when Miles Brennan was still a starter, man, their offense was still humming. They were throwing for 300, 400 yards a game, and they were really moving the ball. It was the defense that was so bad. And so I think that's what Orgeron looks at is that, look, I really struck out with Bo Pelini, bringing him back, 12, 13 years after the fact, and clearly the game had passed him by a little bit. So let me try to get younger. Let me try to get somebody that Dave Aranda recommends and see if it works out. Look, I don't know if it's going to work out, but I at least admire this approach, like I said, as opposed to hiring some old washed-up guy that, okay, you can go get another one of your buddies who's been in the coaching game for 30, 40 years, but I think it looks a lot better to get younger.
Yeah, and on the LSU front on offense, and I'm very intrigued with this team because of the quarterback situation they've got coming back. Of course, you just mentioned Miles Brennan. TJ Finley, he did show some things when he did get to play right when, after Brennan got hurt. But then Max Johnson, those last two games against Florida and Ole Miss, I got his stats here from those two games. He was 59%, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. I mean, he played really, really well in those final two games. I know Ole Miss was not a great defense. They were the worst defense in the conference. But with those three quarterbacks and what he did at the end of the season, I know for LSU fans, that's got to bring a lot of excitement and intrigue with that quarterback battle that's coming up spring.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think Coy Moore, the receiver for LSU, tweeted out yesterday, we got the best quarterback room in the country. I mean, they really do have 3 viable options. But in my mind, Miles Brennan was so good before he lost or got hurt and missed the rest of the season. So in my mind, it's his job to lose, but 2 really good options. TJ Finley, I love when he got a chance to start against South Carolina. What I saw out of him was fearless. The kid did not look scared. It didn't look like the lights were too bright for him starting as a true freshman. And then Max Johnson, like you mentioned, son of former NFL quarterback Brad Johnson, he looked really good too in those last couple of games. Very gutty, very tough performance, especially going to Florida and winning in the swamp when nobody gave them a chance. So, yeah, I think they're in a really good spot with the quarterback position. But as we know, competition nowadays leads to the transfer portal. So if Miles Brennan is the guy, I'd probably expect one of Finley or Max Johnson to hit the transfer portal before the season starts. And we may not like it, but that's just kind of where we are in the realm of college football nowadays. Nobody wants to sit around for 2-3 years waiting for their turn. Mac Jones is a guy who just did it for Alabama and proved that, it can be done and it can be very effective. But a lot of these 4- and 5-star kids coming out 18, 19 years old, they don't want to sit around for years.